Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the ISF Bright Talk channel today. My name is Bruce Page. I'm Head of Services at the ISF, and I'm here with Dan Norman, Senior Solutions Analyst, also from the ISF. And we're going to go through a few ideas about how the ISF can support you in preparing for a cyber crisis. Before I hand over to Dan, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to cover off. This presentation will last for about 45 minutes. And then we'll end with a question and answer session. Please make sure that you type any questions in the question box you'll see on your screen. All viewers are automatically muted by the webinar admins. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please leave the webinar and dial back in. And finally, this session will be recorded and available on demand on the ISF Bright Talk channel. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dan Norman.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. And hello, everyone. I hope everyone isn't suffering too badly during the heat wave. I know in London today it is extremely warm. So I hope everyone is nice and cool and ready for the presentation today. So as Bruce was saying there, my name is Dan Norman. I'm one of our Senior Solutions Analysts here at the ISF, and I've been essentially in charge of looking after the reports around cyber exercises and crisis management. So, sorry, I can hear an echo there, so I don't know if Bruce, if you're still on loud there, or if it might be my laptop, but I'll just carry on. So essentially, I've got about 40 minutes to walk you through some of the best practice guidance that the ISF has developed around preparing for a cyber crisis. Now, we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, cyber attacks have increased massively. In terms of board engagement, senior management engagement, when it comes to managing a crisis, organizations that are proactively preparing for them by either running simulations, pen testing, and testing their response plans and crisis management are the ones that are steadfast in the face of a range of disruptive cyber threats. Now, the ISF has focused intensely over the last 5 years on preparing our members for these different types of simulations and different types of incidents, and we've developed playbooks and exercises for our members to help with this as well. So I've got about 40 minutes. So I'm going to spend about 40 minutes looking at the business problem and then walking through some of the ISF content on why do these, why are cybersecurity exercises important, and how we can prepare, run, and follow up on them as well. So what is the business problem? Well, essentially what we've seen in our research is that security leaders are intensely concerned about the impact that cyber threats can have on their business. And a lot of organizations worldwide are very concerned about their ability to handle these incidents. Now, this might not just be the incident response level, it can be internal and external communications across the organization and across sectors as well. And one way of preparing for these is by running exercises or simulations. Now, organizations worldwide are struggling with crisis management, business continuity, and disaster recovery. And the ISF has some really good content that can help you run these simulations as well. Now, introducing cyber exercises. Well, what are they? Well, we have seen in our research they can take a number of forms. Now, the ISF sweet spot that I would say is the tabletop and the simulation space, but cyber exercises can come in a number of different formats, depending on the budget, skills, number of individuals readily available to run these simulations as well. So tabletop simulations are the classic format. People in a room, kind of wargaming, testing different scenarios and how they might be able to respond. Don't really need a lot of technical infrastructure. They're fairly easy to plan, and you're not necessarily dependent on a ton of people in the room or technical infrastructure to underpin it. Digital simulations are a little bit more technical in a sense, so you might need a fake environment to help you run the simulation. Then again, you can do these in sort of alternate environments. A lot of organizations pay hefty sums to do digital simulations. Essentially, it's the same as a tabletop, but you are very much dependent on the tech. The red and blue teaming sort of falls into cybersecurity exercises because you have the attackers and the defenders. The attackers trying to compromise the organization, and the defenders are trying to bat away the attackers. Pen testing and phishing are probably the most well-known and popular out there. So pen testing is essentially trying to find vulnerabilities and holes before attackers do, and then using that information to plug the gaps. Phishing exercises sort of fall into the awareness space, which arguably cybersecurity exercises are as well. And what we've seen in our research and the work that we've done with our members worldwide is that cyber exercises can be an excellent platform for raising awareness across the organization about cyber threats and cyber risk. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today really is the top one, the tabletop simulations. And I personally believe, and our members are big advocates of running them because they are cost effective, they are really efficient at identifying weaknesses across business continuity, crisis management, disaster recovery, and incident response. But they're also that strong awareness vehicle. So why do them? Well, organizations perform simulations and exercises for a range of reasons. A lot of organizations, especially in the financial industry or critical national infrastructure, they have to run simulations. They have to run exercises as part of regulations. So, for example, in the UK, the Bank of England runs a joint venture simulation with all of the banks. A lot of other organizations in different industries don't do this currently, and I would definitely be an advocate for supporting that across different sectors too. But a lot of our members run them for these reasons on screen. So what we've seen, a lot of senior management, a lot of boards may be kind of up on the news and seeing lots of different incidents happening to organizations in their industry or even in their supply chain. And they think, look, how would we respond if this incident happened to us? So proactively taking steps to do this. Other drivers might be restructures internally. When an organization merges, acquires, or has different ventures, they bring on an organization that has otherwise different response plans, different ways of working, reporting lines, communication streams. And during a real crisis, these types of individuals, these types of teams will be tested like never before. So doing this before the real thing is incredibly impactful. One other piece that is kind of underdeveloped is the contractual obligations. So what we're seeing now is a lot of organizations are building in the requirements to run simulations into their supplier contracts to ensure that their interdependencies are protected during a crisis. So we might see organizations inviting their suppliers or inviting upstream organizations or even downstream organizations into a simulation and testing how they would respond both internally and externally. So a real broad range of stakeholders. It's not just the incident response team or the tech team. It can be the legal team, the HR department, any senior management, communication. Anyone within the organization could be touched upon during an incident. So it's very, very important to invite them, involve them, and test their response plans because they might not know who to talk to. They might not know the actual the continuity plans. And during a crisis, individuals and groups can act very, very differently to the real world or real life situations as well. So what are the benefits? Well, organizations have to proactively try and improve their ability to detect, investigate, and respond to cyber attacks. So this goes back to the incident response piece, business continuity, crisis management, disaster recovery. So knowing your response plans and really sharpening the tools that you have in order to be able to fight back against attackers or report to the right people is so important. If we just look at organizations that are impacted by cyber attacks, it's not just the cyber attack that causes impact. It can actually be the regulator afterwards. So potentially fining the organization for lack of reporting. That is a two-pronged impact, really. So having a strong, robust, pragmatic, usable response plan can go a really long way in reducing the impact of an incident, both primarily and secondary as well. The second piece, which I really am an advocate for, is cyber exercises are an excellent mechanism for providing training, awareness, and guidance to any team involved. So, for example, we've been working with a number of organizations worldwide, but organizations that work in the manufacturing industry, they may have factories, OT-centric individuals. They may have builders and individuals of that type of job role that have no awareness or recognition of cybersecurity or information security or the threats and risks posed to them. So running an exercise that can train them is a really fun, engaging way of getting a message across. Communication, again, is key. So learning how to communicate both internally to your team and externally to the regulator is, again, a key piece of running cyber exercises. But really, the exercise itself can identify gaps across your response plans, but also across your technical infrastructure and your people and procedures too. So you might not have the job roles in place currently to report. You might not have the right number of security practitioners, risk managers, communicators to communicate and reduce the risk of cyber attacks in the future as well. But really, the ISF has a strong approach here for preparing, running, and then following up on these cyber attack simulations or these cyber exercises, which I'm going to walk you through soon. So the ISF materials that we have, there's a number of really strong pieces of material that are validated by our ISF community worldwide that you can use to design your simulations as well. So firstly is our cyber security exercise paper, which walks through best practice when designing a simulation and how to do it. We've, of course, got our cyber attack scenario builder, which uses the concept of the cyber attack kill chain to design a realistic scenario. Of course, you can mimic and mirror examples of cyber attacks in the wild, but if you're stuck for ideas, you can go back to this cyber attack scenario builder, or even some of the ISF's threat horizon papers as well. And then finally, the way in which we support our members is we have a cybersecurity exercise planner, which takes all of the logistical issues out of the question there. Now, of course, the ISF services team can help. We've run dozens of bespoke cyber attack simulations worldwide for our members across a range of industries. We have around 500 organizations across plenty of industries, from governments through to banks, insurers, to even academia, that we run these simulations for. And we design bespoke simulations that go away from the cookie cutter approach. We help our members design relevant, impactful simulations that can train their workforce to manage a cyber crisis more effectively. So how do we do this? The ISF approach is validated, underpinned by work that we do with our members globally. So it's not just myself or Bruce's brains working here. This is validated content that is genuine good practice that our members do use. Now, simple approach. When designing a simulation, you have to prepare. We have to do all of the due diligence. We have to design something that is going to work and is going to resonate. Running the simulation on the day has a lot of component parts to make it relevant and impactful. But importantly is the follow-up. The follow-up piece is the area where there's no point doing the simulation if you're not doing it in a scoped, impactful way that can really help train the workforce or improve policies, improve response plans and playbooks to the real incident. We want to elevate the organization's approach by doing this. So phase A, prepare. Well, what are the key elements? So it's a fairly logical approach to preparing for a simulation. And I can take you through each of these component parts on the following slides. But essentially, the aim is to scope the exercise and involve the right people by designing a relevant and impactful scenario that is going to train our workforce and test them and their response plans so that we can use that information to improve the organization over time. So the first piece, selecting the target. Scope, as I've mentioned on the preceding slides, is key. We don't want to fall into the trap of covering everything and covering everyone and therefore doing nothing. We want to focus on an area of the organization, either senior management or a piece of technical infrastructure, devices, people, or locations. So for example, with some of our members worldwide, we focused on a very niche market. We focused on just senior management to test their ability to respond to a crisis. That's at a very high level. It's a very short 2 to 3 hour engagement. We know that senior management have a small window of opportunity to do this type of thing. So it's very, very niche. Whereas for other organizations, we can run it at a business unit level. For example, with one of our members, there is a large multinational organization in the telecoms industry, and they have different operating units globally. Now, for each of those component business units, we've run specific cyber attack simulations that are relevant to their regulations, their jurisdictions, and incidents that are most likely to happen to them. So each of those simulations, we've gathered information and we're able to design a simulation that is more impactful for them. So assessing constraints. When designing a simulation and getting it in the diary, it can be quite resource intensive in finding the right time to do this. Getting it on the agenda is key. And I think a way in which organizations can do this is by expressing to the relevant stakeholders the reasons why we're doing it. So we're doing this to empower you, to test you, but we're doing it to provide you with the skills, the technologies, and the processes to manage your team and manage the crisis more effectively. When we're assessing constraints, time, resource, skills, budget is always key. When can we do this? How many people do we need in the room? Who do we need? How much budget do we have to do it? And then availability falls into that same category as well. It's always difficult to try and get 10 senior managers or even the board in the room. So having that plan with 6 months or so is key. For other groups, it's a lot easier. So assessing that scope and assessing who needs to be involved is really important. The ready-made technical environment is less important, I would say, when running tabletop simulations and the sweet spot that the ISF has, because we would essentially do all of the work when designing the simulation. So it's not like you have to have a digital copy of your entire environment to run this. You can have more bang for your buck by doing it as a genuine simulation. So once we've assessed constraints, we know when to do this, we can begin embarking on designing the cyber attack scenario. Now, I would say the easiest way of doing this is just copying content from the market. So, for example, WannaCry was a really good driving force for a lot of our members to test their response to that if they weren't actually impacted. Other different cyber attacks that we've seen in the media are a good ammunition. However, if you want to be a bit more creative and bespoke and relevant to your organization, then the ISF cyber attack chain and the cyber attack scenario builder can go a really long way in crafting something that is really relevant to you as an organization, as well as your industry. So, of course, many of you on the line would recognize the kill chain here. It's essentially taking an attacker perspective on how they would get into the organization and what they would do with the information if they got in. So starting out on the performing reconnaissance and then moving out to exploiting information. Now the scenario builder, this is just an example of how we might design something. design an attacker's route towards extracting that information or whatever the impact might be. It's just a very good way of visualizing how an attacker would do this and whether or not it would actually work, because we want to validate this with you and validate this with the people working in the organization. Because we could quite easily just come in and say, look, everything's gone down. But then what? That doesn't really have much of an impact. It's less believable. We have a small window of opportunity to do this. So we want to make it very bespoke, very specific, and very relevant. So we've already kind of mentioned the different types of exercises we can run. And here is just a chart really of the amount of time it might take, the budget, resourcing, and technical environment you might need to run them. As mentioned, the ISF's sort of sweet spot is tabletop simulations. They can typically take anything from 3 hours up to a day to run with a range of different stakeholders. These engagements can be run in sort of sped up timelines. So what we do at our chapter events is we invite our members to attend and we run sped up engagements. So over the course of 2 hours, we might run a 2-day event where we're testing a ton of different types of threats, different response plans. And we do it in a sped up, speedy environment because we're trying to get the bang for the buck. They don't really cost too much money either to do it as well. So designing the tabletop simulation takes a bit of creativity, takes a lot of discussions to make it relevant and impactful, but it's not resource intensive. We can take a lot of the legwork out of it for you as well. So, of course, the logistical arrangements are important. So making all of the necessary travel arrangements is important for making sure we get the right senior management and people in the room at the right times as well. So all of the classic logistical pieces here around scheduling dates is key, having the right rooms and equipment. And then essentially on the day, it can be fairly straightforward. But ultimately, we want to take a little bit of a step back, because why are we doing this in the first place? What is the driver? What do we want to get out of this? And importantly, for organizations that do this in a pragmatic, proactive manner, they define their success criteria. So what are we trying to achieve by running the exercise? Are we trying to test our overall response to an incident? Are we looking at specifically testing our disaster recovery? Are we looking at improving engagement across the business? Are we looking at improving awareness for our managers? What does that mean for you? What would a successful exercise be? Would it be that we've essentially were able to bat away any incidents or responses, or are we actually trying to uncover gaps so we can proactively improve them over time as well? So we need to assess our participants, but as well as the group's ability to make decisions under pressure, whether or not they can follow playbooks or guidance. But really, are the playbooks and guidance good and fit for purpose? Because they might not be. There are a range of new disruptive threats that may be able to compromise our organization, and the playbooks currently might not be relevant. So what we do with our members is we typically take a future-looking perspective on this. We take some of our threats from Threat Horizon 2023 or 2024, and we design something that is future-looking so that when it comes to the real incident in 2 or 3 years' time, the organization is ready to defend. Communication is key as well. So we need to assess our ability to communicate internally and externally under pressure, whether or not we can escalate serious issues, and how well we can complete tasks. Now, completing tasks is one of the creative ways, because in some cases during intense cyber attacks, you might not have access to your Outlook. You might not have access to certain systems. So being able to test that downtime and whether or not we can be resilient is really important as well. But having that success criteria outlined and knowing what good looks like and how to measure it is very important, and also demonstrating a return on investment. So when we're designing the scenario here, building a playbook is key. So running this on the day it can be difficult if you haven't done the preparation, but using the playbooks that the ISF can can develop and that we have examples for in our ISF Live platform. It's all about designing what the facilitators in the room need to do and expected outcomes by the participants so that we can proactively respond and train and help the people in the room do what they need to do. So essentially, what are the steps taken by the facilitator? What are we clicking on? What are the potential actors in the room doing? What do we need to nudge the people in the room towards doing as well? Then we have expected actions. So what are we expecting the participants to do? And if they don't do it, then we need to make notes. We need to note down why they didn't do it, what they did do, and whether or not it fell into best practice, so that we can come armed with good information to our reporting stage as well. Now, we call these next pieces injects. So during a shortened timeline, say 2 or 3 hours, we can add in a number of different threats, a number of different scenarios and injects that the people in the room have to respond to. So, for example, we may have the media, we may have internal individuals, the regulator, the police, lots of different types of injects from the media, from social media through to email. Depending on what you want it to be, we can be very tailored and bespoke. And we want to really test different communication platforms as well. So phone calls, emails, LinkedIn, whatever you want it to be. It's all about testing the organization and the individuals in the most challenging ways possible. So phase B, on the day. So when we're there on the day, what do? Well, we have to brief the participants, tell them why they're here, what's going to happen, how long it might take. But importantly is the boundaries of the test. So depending on who's in the room, we need to know where the incident stops and real world starts. So I've seen firsthand organizations that have run digital simulations in the real world, and people within the organization didn't even know it was happening. And what happened was they actually called the police and they ended up reporting the incident that wasn't a real incident, and it triggered a number of concerned individuals throughout the organization and throughout the industry as well, because they didn't really scope and keep the boundaries of the test. But with the ISF's approach of running these simulations, that is taken out of your hands. So everything is scoped. People in the room are up to date and know what's going to happen, and then we just essentially test you there and then. From the perspective of the individuals marking the homework, is recording all information is so important. So who did what? What were the relevant actions? How did they do it? Did they respond well under pressure? What decisions did they make? And importantly, what were the consequences of that? Who responded to that decision? Did it have an impact? Did they deviate from current playbooks? Was the playbook relevant? What were the issues identified? What was the severity? How did they classify these types of incidents? And how long did it take? Was the time that it took good enough to respond? And are we considering the broad spectrum of things that we need to consider, whether or not we're responding to the regulator, communicating internally, communicating to the police or law enforcement? There's lots to think of during the incident or during the actual simulation and during the exercise. So having 1 or 2 people in the room that are making notes and really monitoring and watching what's going on is really important. From there on, we run the exercise. So we have the solid playbook. We've got the simulation designed. We can run it and we can note down everything that's happening, so that when it comes to the final phase, the follow-up, we're armed with the relevant information to make change across the organization. So review is key. So we're looking at taking feedback initially from the participants, because this is not just testing the crisis management or preparing for the crisis. This is also an awareness vehicle, a training vehicle for individuals involved in the exercise. So importantly, we want to understand the level of engagement. Did they enjoy it? Was it helpful for them? Did they learn? And then we can begin doing our third-party review. So what were the strengths and weaknesses that we perceived from the individual in the group? How did they handle the incident? How did they handle the cyber attack? All of this information is so key for the organization, or even the ISF if you're working with us, to create action plans. So I was fortunate enough to work on our crisis management report with one of our colleagues who was CISO at Maersk during the high profile incident that they experienced. And we have an entire suite of areas that the organization can be marked against. So looking at your ability to handle communication, incident response, all the way through to where the process is in the right condition. Do we have the right people in place? So we can take all of this information to design these action plans. So what were the issues? How are we going to overcome them? What were the problem areas? How do we then prioritize that? So, for example, there may be a broad range, a plethora of issues. So knowing how to address those issues in the right manner, in the logical manner, is key as well. So implementing these action plans. Now, off the back of cyber attacks exercises and simulations, there can be a range of new projects or investments that might be required. For example, we may find that the people involved in the exercise or involved in the simulation were not aware of the risks posed to them. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We can use that as ammunition to design new training, education, and awareness materials, which can then help us as a department, help us as the security function to push that awareness of risk upwards towards the board and beyond. Now, the most likely changes are around policies, procedures, and playbooks. So a lot of organizations worldwide have playbooks, but they might not be fit for purpose for a range of new threats that might be coming over the next 6 months or even a year. Now, another piece here is around people. So people, process, technology is the classic triad of areas that may be improved, but people are key to managing a crisis. So having the right people to communicate and respond, for example, forensics teams, the risk managers, communicators, both internally and externally, can go a really long way in securing the business. Technologies too cannot be understated as well. So we may have or may identify there as a significant lack of technology that can monitor, report, and manage a crisis. So that may be an indicator of what we need to do to improve. And of course, we may have scope to run more simulations over time. So it's always good to run a simulation at the beginning of the year or again at the end of the year, and then compare and contrast the results. So we want to constantly improve. It's that cyclical nature of identifying weaknesses by doing these simulations, improving awareness, improving the plans, and creating a more resilient environment for our organization and our people to operate in. And then once we've done that training, has it had an impact? So it's not about running the simulation in isolation and just leaving it there. This has to be part of a wider progressive information security program of improving the security culture of the organization, improving awareness, but also improving the crisis management and resilience of the organization and the individuals internally as well. Now, the ISF approach is available to our members if our members are listening. So definitely go online and explore the cyber exercise paper. I believe we've got the attachments as well on the Bright Talk channel for the cyber security exercise paper. We've got some good content there for our extinction level attacks report, which looks at how to manage a crisis in the moment. And of course, we've got a broad spectrum of simulations that we're hosting all over the world throughout 2022 and 2023. And I think our next one is in Manchester. So the dates for anyone based in the UK, that is there. You can attend for free. It's an excellent way of learning from the industry peers, and of course, hearing some of the best practice in person. But really, from this presentation today, I could spend hours and hours and hours walking through every component part of firstly designing a simulation, but more importantly, how to manage the crisis. But essentially, I want to give you some assurance that any organization can design and run a cybersecurity exercise. And you can do it with differing budgets, people, or other requirements as well. It's not just the big companies that have millions of dollars to spend on this. We've been doing these with smaller organizations, and they have to do this. Cyber attackers can go after anyone. They can attack any organization at any time. So being resilient and having these plans in place and knowing what to do during a crisis can be the difference between surviving or not surviving. And organizations that do run simulations, we've seen the data, they are better positioned to deal with a range of real life cyber attacks and cyber threats as well. So knowing who to communicate with, knowing your response plans, being resilient is the key word. And finally, cyber exercises is not just the response. It is an excellent awareness vehicle. It's a mechanism to identify gaps across your organization. So any security holes that might need to be remediated. So it's not just doing a, for example, maturity assessment or a security health check. This can be an excellent way of getting all of those things done in one way. Firstly, testing crisis management, continuity, and disaster recovery, improving awareness, but also exposing overlooked holes in the organization. So thank you for your time. I'll be more than happy to take any questions. I can see some pinging through in the system here, but Bruce, happy to hand back over to you to take any questions. I think you're on mute there, Bruce.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. Really interesting presentation, presenting a lot of what the ISF have discovered as best practice in running cyber exercises. And as you've mentioned, and as we've promised, it's now time for some questions and answers. I think the first one that came in is, apart from the IT team, who else in the business should be part of the process of creating a playbook for one of these ransomware cyber exercises?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think there's a misconception that responding to, say, cyber attacks or cyber incidents is just with the IT team or just with the incident response team. What we found in our research and what we've seen typically in the media is that it can touch upon pretty much every element of the organization. So communication, legal, HR, through to anyone across the board. So, for example, if we take the WannaCry incidents or NotPetya, for example, looking internally at some of the members of the ISF that were hit by that, it was by no means the IT team. If anything, the IT function was completely down. So if a cyber attack takes down all of your IT component areas of the organization, then what? Who's going to be involved then? You have to have fallbacks and then fallbacks and then fallbacks. And what we've seen, for example, say if the CEO is on a plane during an incident, who's going to respond to the media then? These are the kind of tricky questions and the creative questions that you need to ask and you need to prepare for, because it's never going to happen in the typical playbook response plan. You have to be resilient and has to be flexible. You have to have backup plans, and people need to know that as well. And relying on one element of the organization is only going to end in tears, I think. Yeah,
no, you're right. As we found, and as anyone who's experienced a cyber attack can testify, these attacks don't always run according to plan. It's basically everything that you confront is a surprise. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. This isn't what we prepared for. So the exercise is an excellent way to prepare teams and individuals for actually, that fateful day that will arrive one day or another. How to think on your feet, be adaptive, and basically confront the unknown. We have another question in that is, what do you believe are the best scenarios or best threats to run for most organizations?
Well, that's a tricky question to answer holistically for all organizations worldwide. But I mean, a key theme or a key threat that we've been focusing on over the last year or two has definitely been ransomware. It formed a core component of the simulations we've run with the members. And it's shamefully, it's a buzzword as well. So boards are slowly recognizing it, and it's seemingly in the news all the time. So ransomware is, of course, a key incident or key threat that organizations should consider. However, I think one of the core messages that I try to get across in this presentation is when designing that cyber attack scenario, it has to be relevant to your organization. So you have to take the time to understand what types of threats are we seeing impacting our industry, our region, why are they being successful? So profiling our organization and how an attacker might get in can provide us with the information we need to design a scenario that can actually touch upon that, rather than just saying blanket ransomware. What are we going to do? Well, what systems is that ransomware attacking? How long has it been taken down? Do we already have a response for that? Do we have cyber insurance? What does our insurance package look like? There's a lot of questions that have to be asked, I think, to design a really impactful and relevant scenario. And we've seen good cases and bad cases because, for example, you've got a small window of opportunity with individuals that might not necessarily be security focused. So designing a simulation that doesn't make any sense to them and their role and their systems, it's not going to have any impact. So taking that cookie cutter approach of just saying ransomware, it's not going to have any impact. But designing, say, as I mentioned in the presentation, the manufacturing example we've taken a very bespoke, factory-specific threat that is going to impact them. And we've profiled all of their systems, the people that are working there, historical incidents that have happened as well. So when it comes to the real thing, it's going to resonate and they'll be excited and it'll be relevant to them, rather than something that's just spray and pray.
Yeah, well, and that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
The cyber exercises is to create an opportunity or a platform for engaging with people out in the business who ultimately, need to respond in these cases, but ultimately also own the business risk that's associated with the IT or security risk that we've been talking about. Another question. What are some of the limitations of tabletop exercises? One of the slides there, you said there's several different types of cyber simulations. And, I guess the implication is tabletop exercises can do a lot, but, they probably have some limitations as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you're not testing real life infrastructure and the real life technology, then there's always going to be that element of lack of realism, I would say. However, I mean, testing real life technology in the moment is quite dangerous if you're sandboxing it and doing it in that kind of way. Then you can get around it, but it takes far more time. It takes a lot of effort, and it costs tons more. And for organizations that aren't the huge banks or the huge insurers that can't at the snap of a finger do something like that, then the simulation, the tabletop simulation and wargaming is in my opinion, the most cost-effective and beneficial way of not just testing how potentially IT infrastructure and architecture might respond to an incident, but we're more talking around managing the crisis, managing the human reaction, managing communication. So it's a big sort of spectrum of areas that we're touching upon there. And I think the one kind of, I hesitate to say lacking, because it still does theoretically test it, but it is theoretically testing the technical infrastructure, rather than, say, if you're doing a pen test or red and blue teaming, you can really focus on the tech side. But what we've seen in our research is that the people are the ones that can get the organization back online. And the people are the ones that manage the response, and the people are the ones that manage the media. So focusing too much on the tech can be quite dangerous.
Okay, yeah, that's great. There's people, process, and technology, and maybe there's a lot of focus on technology, a lot of focus on process, but with the tabletop, we're really talking about the people and how can the people be, let's say, upskilled to better respond in the case of an incident.
Yep.
There's a question about who is ISF Services and what are some of the things you've learned in the course of helping organizations to run a cyber exercise. Well, I'm the head of ISF Services, so I'll reply to the first one, and maybe Dan, you can pick up on the second. So ISF Services is a professional services organization. Among the things we do is we will help to run a cyber simulation exercise for organizations, either our ISF members or non-members. And just think of us as a helping hands for your ISF membership, in case you're a member. If you're a non-member, we're somebody you can talk to about all kinds of information security, governance, risk, compliance type of issues and best practices. So after that, what are some of the things we've learned, Dan, in doing these type of exercises with organizations across the world, large businesses, small businesses, public-private organizations? What are some of the key takeaways that, our team learned?
Well, I think these types of engagements are incredibly engaging and impactful. And the key thing that I think I tried to get across throughout the presentation was it's not just testing the crisis management, it's improving awareness of different threats and engagement across the business. And as mentioned, we typically only get a small window to do this. And with COVID, the last 2-3 years have been very insular. That lack of human interaction and connection has had quite an adverse impact on our ability to communicate with each other. And getting people in the room in person doing this is proving to be very impactful on an organization's ability to manage a crisis, but also communicate with each other again. We don't typically get much of a chance to do this. So getting senior managers in a room or people that wouldn't necessarily communicate with each other in a room is a really, really great way of preparing for the real thing. But really, we've seen tons of lessons learned from these types of simulations. We've seen a lot of organizations have good response plans for disaster recovery and business continuity. The mature ones have this in place, but what we found is using them under pressure is a completely different story. Mm-hmm. So being able to be not just resilient as an organization, but resilient as individuals is key. And testing that and really understanding how well you can manage that stress can go a really, really long way. But I would definitely go back to these are not just impactful; they're really fun. They're my favorite types of engagement to be involved in as well.
Yeah, I think what we found also is that it's actually a skill to be able to respond well under pressure. And like any skill, it's something that you don't really have necessarily at the beginning. But if you try it and you practice, it is a skill that you can acquire and become actually quite good at. And increasingly, I think out in the world, and certainly with the proliferation of ransomware and other cyber attacks, security teams are being called upon to exercise these kinds of, let's call them personal skills, or being able to step back and analyze a situation when you're under pressure. Stuff that you don't learn in school or any of the typical kinds of training that people in the industry get. So certainly some of the key takeaways that we've seen. Do you have any other observations about where organizations tend to be pretty good, or where organizations tend to be less good in when we get in there and actually start looking at in these analysis, as you said, after the exercise? What are some of the observations there?
Yeah, well, it really does depend on the maturity of the organization. But then again, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be testing. You shouldn't be proactively improving. You can't rest on your laurels with these types of things. What we've seen is that organizations are happy to follow playbooks, but they're not that comfortable to make decisions or respond with incomplete information. So if they get indications of a potential threat or a potential risk manifesting, they're not happy responding without knowing the full picture. And what we see in the real world is you have to respond without having the full picture. It can impact share price. It can impact your reputation. You have to stay on top and manage that crisis because, for example, social media will manage it for you if you don't proactively get on top of it. Also, communication and decision making is key, and doing that in a safe environment, doing it in a way where there's no problem with responding in that way is a really helpful way of preparing for the real thing. There's no sort of jeopardy doing a cyber security exercise. You can only benefit from doing it, and getting that sort of that psyche across to people involved is really, really helpful. It can go a really long way because what we've seen, and in my own conversations with some of our members, is to get people on side that aren't in security. This can't be seen as a test. It can't be seen as we're putting you on the spot. We want to see how you respond. It's about, as an organization, we want to be resilient. We want to improve our response plans. We have to work together, and having that underpinning it is a really good way of improving incident response and crisis management.
Yeah. And ultimately, like we were saying a moment ago, some organizations are really good at learning and having that kind of approach. Others have trouble, actually. There's an expectation that everybody's going to perform, at the top of their game on the first time out, which is pretty unreasonable. So there's this kind of learning culture, I think, that comes part and parcel of the effort to try to improve, become more resilient, et cetera. You have to learn how to do it in a lot of cases. So I think we've run over a little bit on the 45-minute, promise here, Dan, but it's been a fascinating exploration of some of the best practice of ISF in running exercises like this on behalf of members, or providing tools for members to run them on their own. We'll just be finishing up here now. I want to thank you for your time. Those of you who are out there watching, if you want to learn about other ISF webinars and events, please visit us at securityforum.org. And if you've missed anything from this webinar, including the slides, those will be available on demand from the ISF Bright Talk channel. We have another webinar coming up on the 4th of August on filling the skills gap. It's another webinar oriented towards the human side, or the people side of people, process, and technology. So you can tune in for that if that's part of what you're interested in. So if you've enjoyed today's session, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating down below. And thanks all for joining, and I wish you a pleasant day. Goodbye now.